Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.
Hello, I'm Lorene Mills, and welcome to Report from Santa Fe. Our guest today is Dr. Martha Burk, women's pay equity expert. Describe what do people call you?
Well, sometimes they call me names.
Yeah.
But they call me a political writer. I am a radio host. I have a show that originates on KSFR in Santa Fe. It's a 2-minute commentary every week. Runs at 4 o'clock right after Amy Goodman, and on Friday during the news at noon.
And it's called Equal Time, which is perfect for somebody working on gender equity issues.
Exactly right.
They do call you a political psychologist.
That's right.
You're an author. Your first book was, I think, Cult of Power, Sex, Discrimination in Corporate America. Don't we know that one?
Well, we do, and that book came out of the struggle to open Augusta National Golf Club to women. I was in the forefront of that fight because at the time I was chair of the National Council of Women's Organizations in Washington. And so I got sort of thrust into that. It lasted quite a while. I got a lot of recognition, good and bad, and folks still remember it sometimes.
Well, it was in 2003, right?
Right.
It was a really historical effort. What made you choose to do that? Why did you choose that fight?
Well, we really didn't choose that fight. Things come about in such a mundane way, and it turns into a big deal. What happened is I was reading USA Today, the sports section. A woman columnist was writing about Augusta National Golf Club, and they had never allowed a woman in, and it was very tough even for female reporters to get in. They were quite a bastion of old boys. I saw it. I said to my board at the next board meeting, by the way, there's this golf club, they're real famous, and they don't let in women. Why don't we just write them a letter and see if we can nudge them along? And we did. And when they got the letter, they went ballistic and put out a scathing 3-page press release to the entire sports world media corps, and it blew up from that. If they had just answered us with a polite letter that said, oh, you girls, we're thinking about it, we'll probably do it soon, we would have probably thought, okay, that's the best we're going to get. But they went nuts over it, and the sports press loved it.
Mm.
So.
Mm. And of course, they're probably one of the highest profile golf clubs in America because they host the Masters every year.
Right. And as my son said, because I didn't know very much about golf, what I always said is I'm an expert on sex discrimination, and I know it when I see it. When people would ask me, are you a golfer? What do you know about golf? But what my son said to me was, Mother, you have attacked the Westminster Abbey of golf.
Oh, yeah. Well, you did, and how long was the battle? How long did it take?
It played out for a year in the media.
And then when did they invite?
No, they didn't do that until a decade later, after our organization had facilitated 2 lawsuits in behalf of women who worked for companies whose CEOs were members. And they said there's a lot of sex discrimination in these 2 companies, Smith Barney Division of Citigroup and Morgan Stanley. We sued both of them in behalf of the women, collected $80 million for those women, plus a provision that the company could not entertain at any club that discriminated. Well, if they weren't going to be able to play golf, they had to open to women. They couldn't go back to the Masters otherwise. So that's what did it. That got much less publicity than our unsuccessful demonstration in front of the gates 10 years earlier.
Yeah. But, the arc, as Martin Luther King said, the arc does turn toward justice, and it may take longer than we think. Now, one of the reasons I was so excited to have you here, this has been such an exciting week in terms of U.S. history. Howard Harold Wilson, the British Prime Minister, said a week is a lifetime in politics. And this week we have seen some stunning Supreme Court decisions. The Congress has done some amazing things. The city of Albuquerque is moving forward. So, where do you want to start? Since we're talking about gender equity, maybe we should go right to the city of Albuquerque's Gender Pay Equity Initiative.
Well, maybe we should. It's a first in the nation at the city level. And what it does is require contractors or companies who wish to have a contract with the city of Albuquerque to tell the city how they pay women and how they pay men. In other words, report on gender gaps by job classification. If they're doing well, the city will recognize them and they can actually earn a bonus in the bidding process. If they're not doing so well, what we hope and expect is that this will motivate them to look at their pay scales, what's going on here, are we paying women and men fairly, and if not, let's do something about it.
Well, let's look at this a little bit of history. So this has been killed in the United States Senate time after time.
Yes,
right?
it has.
Yeah.
It has.
And when you poll women, most women, it's one of the most important issues to women that they should get equal pay for equal work, pay equity, not get less because they're women. Where has New Mexico been? Because didn't we have a state-level pay equity initiative?
Yes, we did. Under Bill Richardson, he issued an executive order. It was not quite as strong as what the city of Albuquerque is doing, but it was quite strong. And a first in the nation at the state level. The present administration has not pursued it. They have actually weakened it. They haven't done away with it. But there's still a reporting requirement, but it's not as effective as it could be. My hope is that it will remain in place, and I think it will because the present governor has not moved to do anything to change that. And when we get another governor that is more aggressive on pay equity, then that infrastructure is there, and New Mexico will once again have it at the state level.
So, New Mexico now ranks 15th in the nation in pay equity. Is that true?
That's true.
And I want people to really listen to this because in this state, women get 79 cents for every dollar that a man earns for the same work. And that's a difference of $8,789 a year.
Yes, it is, on average. And what I want to add to that, because so many people say, well, women drop out, they work part-time.
They get pregnant.
All this. No, that number is for full-time, year-round work. So none of the factors that people claim cause the wage gap are playing into that number. But for this state, a really important number is for African American women in this state make 69 cents on the dollar, Hispanic women 66, and our Native American sisters are way down at 60 cents. So we really needed to do something about the pay gap in this state. We are doing something. Albuquerque is a city comparable in size, this might surprise you, to Buffalo, to San Francisco, to Atlanta proper.
Miami?
To Miami
yeah.
proper. We have had calls from most of those I just named since Albuquerque started its initiative, and by the way, it formally kicks in on July 15th. But it's been out there so contractors can learn about it, get used to what they're going to have to do. We've had calls from all of those cities saying, how did you do it, and can we do it?
It's just nice to see Albuquerque getting some good press.
It is.
We need it.
And I want to add, too, that this is a totally bipartisan issue. It's popular with women and men of both parties. The Albuquerque initiative, as we know, the office of mayor is nonpartisan, but it's no secret that Richard Berry is a Republican, one of our key members of the task force that put this together. was Clara Apodaca, the former First Lady of New Mexico. Her husband, of course, was a Democrat as governor. So this is a bipartisan effort. We're very proud of it, and it's going to really lead the way in other parts of the nation.
Now, how long did you were head of that task force, weren't
Yes,
you?
I was.
Thank you for your work. How long did you all meet and kind of hammer this out? Because you created it.
Yeah, it took us the better part of a year. The city council passed an ordinance creating the task force, stipulating the kinds of folks we wanted on it, people from the business community, for example, human rights department at the city, people like me that had worked on it, advocates such as Clara Apodaca, who had been talking about pay equity for a long time with various nonprofit organizations. So we put together a good group. We looked at what the state had done, how we thought we could go further, how we could, and this is very important, incentivize the businesses to want to do better instead of punishing them for not doing as well as they should be. And so it includes a 5% premium if they're doing really well on gender pay equity and they're within 10% of parity between women and men. They're going to get a 5% bonus in that bidding process. And so they're also going to get recognition by the city as being leaders on pay equity, and we think that's very important to make the change.
And actually, it's a really good PR thing for them because there are a lot of benefits to the employers to be doing this.
Yes. And what we learned during the Richardson administration when we were doing research about this to see if it could be done, because it never had been at the state level, it costs more to replace an employee who quits because they're not making enough money than it does to give them a raise, usually. I mean, unless they're asking for many, many thousands of dollars. But you take a low-wage state like this one, it's going to cost more to replace a minimum wage or near minimum wage worker than it is to give that small raise.
So one of the complaints, because there'll always be complaints.
Oh, yes.
You are going to give contractors who come within 10% of equity, they'll be given a preference in the bids, and people say, well, just why not pay everybody the same to begin with? But it's like turning an oil tanker.
Absolutely.
Some of these companies pay only 30 to 40% of equity.
Right. We've seen some early data that does not look good. We've seen pay gaps of 30, 40%, as you say. And also, we have to keep in mind that there are factors that play into pay that are not discrimination. Right now, for example, women are the majority in college and have been for several years. So you might have two workers where one is degreed, one is not. One has gotten a little more training than the other. One has been there for several years and is more experienced. Those things count. And so we think a 10% leeway there will capture some of those while still moving people toward parity. But believe me, it's a high bar right now in this state to say even 10%. So we'd love to see people making that 10%. And I just have to add, I was asked, well, isn't that just saying 10% is an acceptable level of discrimination? No, there is no acceptable level of discrimination.
Well, we're speaking today with Martha Burk, Dr. Martha Burk. I didn't get to her. She's written this wonderful book called Your Voice, Your Vote, and it's updated with every election, and it's The Savvy Woman's Guide to Power, Politics, and the Change We Need. Now we're seeing some change, so let's shift gears, say hooray to Albuquerque, but let's go on to the Supreme Court decisions this week. Obamacare. There was a challenge. There were a lot of people that were trying to challenge Obamacare and get it thrown out. But the Supreme Court upheld Obamacare. What does that mean for women? Because one of the targets of the parties that were trying to stop Obamacare was they didn't want women to have free, without a copay, mammograms, pap smears, birth control. It was such a woman's health issue. It was almost more about women's health than anything else.
It was. It's really, really quite surprising how many factors in women's health would have been affected had it been overturned. You just mentioned mammograms and birth control without copay. Some people are opposed to birth control, period, and they didn't like that, trying to overturn that. Before Obamacare, insurance companies could and did charge women more for the same coverage that men got for less money. And the first thing people say is, oh, that's because of maternity. No, that taking maternity coverage out of the mix, women, let's take a 40-year-old woman who did not smoke, was paying more for the same policy as a 40-year-old man who did smoke. And there was a name for it, it's called gender rating. And so one of the members of Congress, one of the women senators, said, well, what they've done is declare being female a pre-existing condition, because that's another thing that was saved in Obamacare. They used to say if you were a victim of domestic violence, that's a pre-existing condition. We're not going to insure you. If you've had a cesarean, that is a pre-existing condition. If you had acne as a teenager,
Oh, my goodness.
that's a pre-existing condition. They can't do that anymore. And now back to that maternity coverage, they used to be able to say, we just don't cover maternity, period. You can't pay us any price. We don't cover it. Can't do that anymore. They have to offer it. So, yes, very, very much a woman's issue. Does it cover abortion? No, it didn't before the Supreme Court decision, and it doesn't now. But all of these other benefits are going to flow to women and their families because of the decision.
Well, the creators of this Affordable Care Act have known for a while that there was some improvements to be made, but as long as the threat of throwing the whole thing out was there, they couldn't fine-tune it and make it better. Now I'm hoping that once this has been decided, that they'll be able to now make the necessary tweaks.
Well, it's going to save New Mexico some money. And here's how. New Mexico is using the federal exchange as a portal. The New Mexico exchange, which we do have, is mainly to qualify people for Medicaid. Now, the board of our state exchange decided a couple of months back that it would cost too much to have a robust state exchange. It's more cost beneficial for this state to go and use the federal exchange. And that's probably going to be what this state does now that we know the federal exchange isn't going to go away. That was a worry. But it'll save our state money.
Well, we have to gallop ahead.
Okay.
Another recent thing that the Supreme Court blocked the Texas abortion ban, which was affecting us a lot because for that huge population, 40 million women of childbearing age that might need those services, they were going to only have 10 clinics in the whole state of Texas.
Right.
A lot of people were coming to New Mexico.
Coming to New Mexico, which puts pressure on our system. We have to be able to accommodate people when we can, especially when they're being denied in their own state. But the thing that's worrisome about this decision is they blocked it, but not permanently.
Yeah.
They said you can't put these highly restrictive requirements like being equipped like a hospital, like doctors having privileges in a nearby hospital, even barring the drug-induced abortions. You can't do that until we, the court, have had a chance to fully visit this question. That will probably be in the next term, but at least for now, those clinics stay open. Now, half the clinics in Texas have already closed, so this was going to get most of the other half.
Yeah. The most stunning, celebrated decision last week was marriage equality. How does that affect women's?
Well, it affects women and men, of course, gay couples both. But it was interesting to me that the two examples given, once the brouhaha died down, news media started looking at, okay, what's next, what didn't get done. And what didn't get done is housing discrimination and job discrimination. And both of the examples cited, at least by the New York Times, were lesbian couples, not gay male couples, because it's still legal for a landlord to refuse to rent to a gay couple. It is still legal to discriminate in employment to a gay person, not a transgender person, interestingly enough, because that is sex discrimination. But if it's discrimination on the basis of being gay or lesbian, it's still legal. We need to change our civil rights laws, and I heard a guy who was totally freaked out by the decision say, well, I think if gays want to marry each other, that's their own business. But this civil rights thing, now that's different. So that's the next barrier.
But one little aspect of that was also handled in the last week and a half or so, and that was they supported the Fair Housing Act. So how can gays be discriminated against in terms of housing? Are they not part of the Fair Housing Act?
No, they're not, and neither are you, and neither am I, and not because we're white and female, but because we're not very low income. Now, if a couple were very low income and lesbian or gay, they probably would be covered. But what that was about is housing vouchers for low income people that need help with housing, and they're handed out by state agencies. We're back in Texas again. Texas was giving them out for neighborhoods that are already predominantly low income, already predominantly black, and holding them away from better neighborhoods. So what they're doing is creating what courts call a disparate impact. And that means that they claim they didn't mean to do this. They didn't know they were creating more ghettos, really. But what the court says, whether you knew it or not, if that was a result, you can't do it. But that case was more about low income than anything else. But what happens, of course, is in Texas, very large black population. Most of the low-income people are black and brown, so it had racial implications, but on its face is about low income.
Well, there's still so much to talk about, and we're almost out of time. The U.S. Congress just last week passed the Obama-supported TPP trade deal, Trans-Pacific Partnership. How does that affect women?
Well, let me say, first of all, just a slight correction. They didn't pass the trade deal. They passed what's called fast-track authority, giving Obama the ability to negotiate it without going to Congress, and then they get to vote it up or down, but they can't amend it. How does that affect women? Well, Communications Workers of America says that's going to take tons of call center jobs away from the United States. It's going to take tons of health care jobs, which is the biggest growth in women's employment that is above the minimum wage, so that's going to happen. Corporations, and this is for all of us, foreign corporations will be able to challenge our laws on things like food safety. Medical patents will be extended for much longer than they are now, and Doctors Without Borders says that this is going to be a disaster for people living with AIDS because they can't get generics because of the patents, and that's mostly women and kids now. I will have to add that all 5 of the New Mexico congressional delegation voted against fast track. I don't know how they'll vote when it comes to the actual treaty, because it depends whether they get to see enough of it to know what it's about. But at least for now, they're holding the line in solidarity against it.
Well, here we are. It's so provocative. Whenever I talk with you, I just think there's so much that needs to be done. But what is it that we can do?
Well, it's a good thing you brought up TPP last. Flush the TPP is one of the Twitter things. But keep talking to our representatives and our senators and tell them how you feel about it. We lost 1 million net jobs in the first 10 years of NAFTA. That is probably going to happen again, and the reason I think so is they passed a companion bill called the Trade Adjustment Assistance. What's that for? To help people who lose their jobs because of Trans-Pacific Partnership. So don't tell me it's going to create jobs. Keep that pressure on. If you see something, say something. You know, that's usually about safety. If you see something you don't like, say something. Because if we don't keep pressure on our elected officials, even if they're not in your party, they represent you, we're not going to get any change. So it makes a big difference.
One thing that always astonishes me, and I come away from talking with you, that there's a lot of hidden agendas going on in some things that we maybe give a cursory look at. What are some hidden agendas in terms of gender equity that we should look for?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people who believe still, and some of them are unfortunately in governing bodies, the U.S. Congress on down, that women really should not work outside the home unless they're poor, and then they should always work without child care. So that's a contradiction. But I think the hidden agenda in a lot of this, when they say religious freedom to religious freedom, my religious freedom is a business, that is really just a license to discriminate. And it is going to hurt if any of that stuff passes. They say, I'm a business owner and I don't believe it, so my business does not have to serve gays, for example. That's been in the news a lot. Let's say that became a reality. What about somebody whose religion believes women shouldn't work outside the home? Then they're going to be able to say, we don't hire women. My religion doesn't support that. Going as far as you can go, there are many religions besides Christianity. The Muslims believe women should be covered. What about that? I won't serve a customer that doesn't cover herself all but the eyes. So it's a very slippery slope.
Very provocative stuff. I'm so happy that you joined us today. Our guest today is Dr. Martha Burk. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I'm Lorene Mills. I'd like to thank you, our audience, for being with us today on Report from Santa Fe. We'll see you next week.
Past archival programs of Report from Santa Fe are available at the website reportfromsantafe.com. If you have questions or comments, please email info@reportfromsantafe.com. Report from Santa Fe is made possible in part by grants from the members of the National Education Association of New Mexico, an organization of professionals who believe that investing in public education is an investment in our state's economic future, and by a grant from the Healy Foundation, Taos, New Mexico.